Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, a managing director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. In the news today, the January 6th committee voted to hold former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in contempt of Congress, and President Biden has declared emergencies in Illinois and Tennessee in the wake of deadly tornadoes. Today's topic is the future of e-commerce, and we're joined by Tyler Scriven, CEO and founder of Saltbox. Tyler, how are you?
Doing great, Ken. Thanks for having me.
So, what's fun about you that I love telling folks is you're an entrepreneur, you're super creative, but you launched this company right at the beginning of a pandemic. Take us back 2 years, right? Like you're planning probably this time exactly 2 years ago, and you're about to launch, and you literally launch your first Saltbox in Atlanta. Like, what was going through your head? What was it like to create the company? What has the journey been like the last 2 years for you?
Yeah. So you're right.
Not to stress you out, but
I do get a little stressed when I think about that. It was December 2019 that we opened our first location, and obviously an exciting time for us. A time where few people in the world knew of this coronavirus, I at that time still had some involvement in running my own e-commerce company, which was really the inspiration for starting Saltbox. And so I became acutely aware of the situation in January, and obviously started worrying about the impact of that on our new little business. Those next few months were quite stressful, and kind of coming to grips with what this all meant. But I will tell you though, at a point in April or March, we made efforts to effectively temporarily close our first location. But our member said, no way, that's not going to work. We've got companies to run here. People are counting on our ability to, get these packages out the door. And so that was a eye-opening moment for us, where we realized that what we were building was, in a very real sense, a part of this, new essential economy.
Tell us more about Saltbox. Like, where do you fit in? Who are you helping? What problem are you solving? Do a quick macro kind of 101 on what you're providing here.
Yeah, I think the best way to kind of answer that question is to give some context as to how the world, and in particular our retail economy, is changing, and then the role we play in that. So if you go back to 2010, you had about $300 million of gross merchandise value transacted online from small businesses. If you fast forward to today, that number is somewhere on the order of $200-300 billion of small business e-commerce activity out of a total of roughly $1 trillion of national e-commerce activity. A literal 100x expansion of the SMB e-commerce market over the past roughly decade. That is the backdrop of the business that we're building. I think if we dig a bit deeper into that, what you realize is that obviously the small business now has pretty sophisticated logistics needs, just like the big business, but they need that logistics capability to be delivered to them in a very different way. They don't need 1 million square feet of space. They need 1,000. They don't need 10,000 workers. They need 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 sometimes. What they need is a logistics offering that at its core is more approachable, more accessible, and more human-centric in its design. And so that's really what Saltbox is all about. We are building a human-centric logistics platform that we think will be critically important to powering the future of commerce for small business.
And look, you yourself were in the same position that lots of your clients now are. How were you doing it? How were your clients previously, before a Saltbox existed in their location? Were they in their garage? Were they in their house? Were they in a self-storage unit? I mean, talk to us.
Yeah, as you say, I myself operated an a small e-commerce company for a number of years, and that's really where I was exposed to this problem. And my observation was simple. We had really excellent digitally enabling technology to drive power our growth. You think of brands like Shopify and Stripe and MailChimp and Facebook and all these sort of things, and that is why that number has gone from 300 million to 300 billion over the past decade. But the operational aspects of running my business were very challenging. warehousing, fulfillment, supply chain, labor, capital, all the things that are behind the scenes, in many respects felt forgotten, disregarded. And so, many companies, as a result of that, find themselves operating out of, basements and self-storage facilities and garages. And, the simple reality is it's really quite hard to run a e-commerce business out of a garage. If you've ever tried, getting, the UPS driver to take away 50 packages a day at your house, good luck. It's just not going to work out for you. So, I think the need became obvious, and it became, I think, pretty clear that I was not alone. That there were millions of companies in the same position.
So everyone likes to talk about how COVID's been an accelerant to various sectors of the economy, from Netflix to Instacart. But I think this particular sector, what you're doing and leveraging the Etsy economy and makers and small businesses, talk about the impact of COVID, right? Like, you had this business plan pre-COVID. So where are you in your thinking of kind of the business plan and the economics and where you Saltbox is headed versus now post-COVID? Where are you? Have things changed in your planning? What's accelerated? Take us on that journey, right? Because you're in a unique spot. Like, you started this before there was a pandemic, and now we're in one, and it seems like there's been pretty fantastic success and demand generated stuff.
Yeah, I mean, first off, it's still very early for our business. It's still very early for this transition into a digitally driven retail economy at large. I would actually say a digitally and logistically driven retail economy. To our conversation just before this, you referenced the fact that the CBRE and JLL and others are forecasting the need for 1 billion square feet of additional e-commerce focused industrial capacity by 2025. Which is true, but my question is, well, what about 2035? And it's well more than 1 billion, right? We've got a long way to go here. I think to your question of how has COVID impacted our business and kind of the sector, if you will, at large. Obviously, the growth pace of e-commerce was already quite strong, and I think we all agreed it was going to continue. COVID has, accelerated that. That's very clear. It has brought more attention to the point. But I think, though, as we kind of move, beyond the initial jolt of COVID, that initial positive acceleration, we're now beginning to have to see and live with, all the negative aspects of that disruption, this is well documented, the supply chain issues and so on and so forth. But I think that these things have a outsized impact on smaller companies because they don't have the balance sheets typically to navigate in the same way that larger companies do. And so that's something that we're certainly seeing as a disruptive factor, for our members.
One of the things I love kind of focusing on these conversations is really this kind of like nexus of the public sector and the private sector. And I think there's some of these more macro trends that I'd love to get your take on, whether it is supply chain issues, whether it is even zoning regulations by municipality and just the supply of industrial space and markets. I mean, what role does the public sector play in kind of addressing the supply chain, helping small businesses, create more manufacturing and homegrown kind of entrepreneurship? How does that all like? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to do. Starting with the issue of space. Once again, it's worth repeating. There is a shortage that can be presently measured, on the order of 1 billion or plus, but over a 10+ year horizon, many billions of square feet of industrial space, which we're short. I think that industrial space is probably a bit of a misnomer at this point. Really better to think of this as logistics enabling space. Industrial represents a kind of aged connotation, if you will, that isn't quite accurate today. I think that that much of that space needs to exist within the urban and suburban core of our cities. Why? Because you and I and everyone else on this this Zoom call want things, faster, right? We want immediate delivery. That requires more proximity, and so this is a challenge. And how do you move all of this logistics activity into the center of cities and suburbs in a way that is not disruptive to life? It can be done. I think, not to be too self-aggrandizing here, but I think that Saltbox is one small but good example of this, right? Of industrial logistics space that can kind of coexist in a good way in communities that is additive to a community and in its economic activity versus distracting, because we are just pushing through tons of trucks all day. But we've got to have that space. I think another topic that is that for me is critically important in this conversation is how we think about labor in the context of our logistically driven retail economy. If you go back, again, I'll pick 2010 here. You go back to 2010, you or I would have the occasional UPS or FedEx driver show up to our house, and they had their brown truck and their outfit, and like, hey, you're the UPS driver, right? And that's great. Today, I have a dozen delivery drivers come to my door, and sometimes it's a UPS driver in a nice brown truck. Sometimes it's a mother in a Toyota with a baby in the backseat. My point here is that this system now requires a huge number more workers to perform these jobs and get these packages to us, to be a part of this logistics-driven retail economy. And we've got to I think recognize the humanity of the people that make this happen. We've got to think about and figure out ways to ensure that there's fair compensation for their work, there's fair protection for their work, so on and so forth. But what we can't do is we cannot allow for millions of people to kind of transition into logistics-based work and continue to be disregarded in those efforts.
Mm-hmm. Now you can't put the TV on or pop on your smartphone without seeing some type of story or impact of supply chain. How do you think about just the supply chain crisis and constraints we're dealing with, vis-a-vis like actual small businesses, big businesses, and also domestically? How do we address these things? I mean, what are your thoughts about how, does everything need to be more localized, the manufacturing done locally? How do we kind of, take on the larger, broader supply chain issues that we're reading about every day?
Yeah. It's a complicated problem. There's a lot of effort to simplify it into, something that we can say, oh, that's the problem, that makes sense. That's just not the case. The case is that, over the past, 30 or so years, we have invested very, very heavily into an incredibly complex and sophisticated, global supply chain, and that system was disrupted, and now we have several issues. One issue is just the simple yet incredibly complex problem of just reassembling it, turning it back on, all right, if you will. Try to turn on a machine that has 1 million parts. It's hard. What makes that even more complex is that the individual components, if you will, have changed, right? The demand has changed in big ways, right? Supply of labor has changed in big ways. Everything has changed in big ways. And so now you're trying to turn on a machine that has 1 million parts, and all the parts look different than what did before. And so what I would say is that the effort to kind of turn that back on, to get it back to where it was, if you will, is a flawed effort. It's a hopeless effort. I think the effort now has to be, okay, we live in a new world. Things are different. What is the right system, right approach as we go forward? And there are going to be some big changes there. one change, for example, is likely over a period of time is going to be a reduction in the degree of globalization, in our supply chain, right, and where goods are produced. That means that U.S. companies have to store more inventory, here at home. That means they've got to carry bigger balance sheets because they got to pay for those things, so on and so forth. I think that one thing, another way in which I look at what's happening here, Ken, is that the many of the problems that we are facing now, particularly with respect to labor, I think over the long term are actually solved by technology. Right. A simple example of this, in a sense, is if you look at ride-hailing companies, Uber, Lyft, they obviously are having a labor challenge. Now, on the horizon is true autonomous vehicle technology. Right, it will be here soon. You could argue that the pandemic has kind of created this disruption in kind of the timing of these transitions, right? Where you have labor saying, "Look, we're not getting paid enough here. And by the way, don't you guys have robots now that can do this job?" And they're like, "Oh, well, they're on the way, but they're not quite here yet." And so we've got a little of a problem, right? And I think that's kind of where we are. And so my hope is that the disruption caused by the pandemic actually serves to accelerate the adoption of some of these technologies that represent a true long-term solution to a lot of these challenges.
So you started in Atlanta. Give us a quick update. Where are you today, Saltbox? How many locations? How big? How many customers? And where are you headed in the next 18, 24 months?
Yeah, so we started in Atlanta. We opened our first location, as I mentioned, 2 years ago into the jaws of the pandemic. We will end this year.
Real quick on that though, I love when you talk about this, right? You went from a certain percent occupied, pandemic hits, instead of it going down, it went up.
It went up and it went up quickly, and it's the rest is history, as they say. We got a lot of work to do though, for sure. But so to answer your question, we will end this year with 6 locations. We expect a multiple of that by a year and next year. I will say that is still a fraction, truly a fraction of what we consider to be the addressable market here. One simple lens through which to look at that is if you take any one of our locations, take Dallas, for example, where we opened earlier this year, we have roughly 100 companies that operate in that space. The smallest business would be a prototypical kind of Etsy seller, of which there are 2.5 million in the world. The largest would be a $30-40 million e-commerce operator, and everything in between. If you look at the Dallas metro, clearly there are more than 100 such companies. There are many thousands of them, right? And there'll be many more in the future. And so, with respect to the physical aspect of our business, the real estate aspect of our business, we believe that this is essentially a missing sub-asset class of the market today, and that asset class will grow dramatically over the next decade. And I think the same could be said with respect to the logistics demand that we're also leaning into.
So do we need to rethink real estate fundamentally in terms of office buildings, malls, retail centers, industrial? I mean, how do we as a society need to be thinking bigger? We talked about it before we got on, right? We don't think big picture or fast times in this country, and there's things that are just happening at lightning speed that we get caught flat-footed on, and then creates these challenges where there's 90% occupied industrial space and nowhere to go, whether you're needing 100,000 square feet or 1,000 square feet, right? It literally it doesn't matter how big you are.
We need to rethink it at its very core. And look, you go back to 1940 and look at the real estate footprint of the United States. It looked very different. And if you ask, if you took a random survey at that time and said, "Hey, how many of you believe that in another 40 years it will look like this?" you will have these massive, you will have 10,000, 50,000 square foot stores everywhere. Very, very few people will be like, yeah, that's the future. It just doesn't seem believable, right? We are not good at this. We're not good at kind of looking ahead and envisioning dramatic change. But the writing is on the wall. And what it says is that, we love digital commerce. We love logistically driven commerce. We love getting things quickly and efficiently anywhere all the time, right? That trend is going to continue. It has penetrated our economy, call it 20% worth. We got a long way to go. And that requires logistics infrastructure. And that means that, the physical footprint has to change. I think that is, when you couple that with the impact that the pandemic has had on office footprints, we're in for a dramatic shift. One thing I would say to this is that, 6 months ago, the predominant conversation with respect to office was, when are we going to return to work? When's the return happen? When's the return happen? And I think, though, that has changed. Now, no one talks about the return to work. People talk about, new terms. Let's renegotiate this, right? Maybe I'll come back. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll come one day. Maybe, whatever. But there's no more returning. It's only forward. And I think that the same at some point will be realized with respect to retail. That we got to change, and that changes towards logistics enablement.
So you talked previously a little bit about like the arc of e-commerce. Like, tell us about that. I mean, you talked a little bit about it at the beginning. Like, where are we headed, right? I think we always think about things as like, okay, it's plateauing. We only need 1 billion more square feet of industrial. No, we don't. We're only at 600 billion. We've capped out, right? Like, where are we headed in terms of like that delta and growth of like where we're probably going to be? Like, you could service 100 small businesses in Dallas, but there's, hundreds of thousands probably, right? Like, are we just getting there?
It's tough to say, right? I think as I think about this personally, Ken, what I tell myself is that it is the movement, the transformation is so large that it doesn't particularly matter how large it is, because there's so much in there that, like, we can build a very large business. I mean, here's an example of that. FedEx put out an estimate, or maybe a year ago, that said by 2025, I believe, we expect somewhere on the order of 50 to 100 billion outbound e-commerce shipments per year. Now, if you do the math of how many outbound shipments a large 3PL can handle per day, perhaps it's 25,000, perhaps it's 50,000. The numbers are just astronomical, right? It's like, it takes thousands and thousands and thousands of facilities, right, to manage that sort of volume. It takes an order of magnitude more drivers, and we have all these sort of things. So I don't know where we go. What I do know is that the kind of trend, the direction is insatiable. It's inevitable, and no matter which aspect of that logistically driven retail economy you look at, there's lots and lots to be built. And our focus is to make that something that works for the SMB. I think that one of the things we can't lose sight of is that the inherent degree of complexity in a logistically driven retail economy versus analog. It is a lot harder to store something, fulfill something, ship something to a customer than it is a standard cost of the counter and give it to them. And so what I see in that is I see a real threat to the small business if they cannot meet the challenge, the demands of that approach.
Yeah, I mean, at the core of it, I feel like you're out there to just level the playing field. I think there's been a narrative about Amazon's taking over. Every small business and entrepreneur is going to put out of business because they can't do it quickly, efficiently, expeditiously. talk about that, because now I feel like that's been flipped on its head. Clearly, there's more people starting small businesses, more people entering e-commerce, more shipments being made, more money being made. Where are we in this cycle? I mean, is it getting a little bit more equitable and fair and more accessibility? I mean, like the Saltboxes of the world coming in there, kind of creating more of a kind of buffer and economies of scale, because now you can have 100 businesses in Dallas and get the buying power to get the UPSs and FedExes of the world, and all of a sudden compete a little bit more, right? Like, talk about what type of equalizer you can be and others in your peer set need to help small businesses level the playing field.
Well, first off, look, I would never at this stage suggest that Saltbox is having a meaningful impact on the big picture here. That's just not the case yet.
That's what I'm here for.
There you go. We're certainly on our way towards that. And I think, to the core of your question, how is the small business doing? Look, I think that the trend is positive. One way to make sense of that is just to look at the numbers, right? Look at that GMV number. That number is growing every year in a very healthy way. But I also think, though, that there remain really significant threats to their ability to keep pace. What's driving that at the end of the day is you and I and our desires, right? That desire to have it faster and cheaper is the thing that makes it harder for the merchant. And so as I see it, we've got a lot of work to do to build the infrastructure that can enable the SMB to be successful. People often ask us, "Hey, are you guys building technology to solve this problem?" And the answer is, we're not building. You likely won't find Saltbox building warehouse robots or autonomous drones, but you will find these technologies in our buildings. And effectively, what that represents is a democratization of access to these things, right? And so, if in 2030 the small business is going to compete effectively, they're probably going to need to have access to autonomous drones, and hopefully there'll be a bunch of them on our rooftops. That's our plan, at least.
Fascinating. Now, you talked about, before I let you go, you've talked about your previous experience starting your own e-commerce company, but you also have a pretty long, distinguished career at Palantir. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what you're kind of relying on now in this new experience, in this new role, right? Like, looking back at your career, what are you kind of pulling from all these various experiences you've had to kind of maximize the impact and role as the leader of Saltbox? Yeah.
First off, learning every day and try to learn from as many people as I can. My early career was in finance, and met some wonderful people, but frankly, really disliked the work. I think in the end, what I realized was that the work was not about creating value; it was about exchanging and trading value. And I don't like that. I like to create things. I like to be around people who want to create things. I was lucky to find an environment in Palantir in 2009 that represented that to its core. It's about going out in the world and building technology to solve really novel problems. And the other thing that exposed for me was, how do you build a culture? How do you amass people together to go and pursue ambitious goals? And lot to say about that, but the short answer is you start with a very meaningful and compelling problem to solve, and you try to create an environment that is as free of any sort of distraction, any sort of bureaucracy, any sort of nonsense as possible, and let smart, hardworking people do what they're going to do, and get out of the way.
Well, it's funny, every time I talk to you, I feel like I learned something, and my narrative is going to change. I always kind of describe you as a co-working for industrial, and you can kind of white label and create these efficiencies. And what was missing from that commentary was really the logistics angle, and just that impact.
Human-centric logistics.
Yeah,
that's what we're doing. And I think I always tell my team, if you fast forward to 2030, I'm pretty sure that there's going to be a business, maybe a few, that own the SMB logistics market. And if Saltbox is in the #1 position, good for us.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm sure it's not busy in your warehouses this time of year. So we appreciate you taking the time out to pop on Coffee with Ken. Always a pleasure seeing you. Everyone tuning in, really appreciate you watching. Want to wish you a happy holiday season, a safe season, and we'll be back with more Coffee with Ken in 2022. Tyler, great seeing you.
Thank you so much, Ken.
All right, everyone, stay well. Visit www.coffeewithken.com to catch up on old episodes over the holidays when you're bored and don't want to talk to your family. Take care. Bye.